Mr. Toison.
Mr. I almost called you Mr. Younger for some reason. It's just the British accent, so I had to default to somebody else.
That would have been, all right there, Mr. Toison, you little melt.
Mr. Haynes, what's up?
I am still thinking about you calling me Mr. Younger, and I'm thinking, is that a compliment?
It
Or
is.
is that an insult?
It's complimentary. 100%.
Complimentary. All right, I'll tell you. Younger's really good at a lot of things.
Yeah.
He's really strong.
Yeah.
So if that's maybe that's why you thought I was Mr. Younger.
Yeah, he cooks really good food.
Anyhow, Chris, this is the first time you've been on the podcast as a member of the Process Programming.
Yeah,
Coastal.
important distinction, I guess.
Yeah. You first came on the podcast, which is quite ironic, I think, when I think back to your first time on the podcast, because you were talking about your career at the time, and where you'd been with your career, and it most definitely wasn't in fitness.
No.
And you, I feel like, at a crossroads where you're contemplating the future and what you wanted to be doing.
Absolutely.
And then I received a message from you being like, "Hey, remember we did that podcast about me wanting to quit my job? Well, I just did it."
Yeah.
And then from that message, lo and behold, a month or so later, I hired you to be a part of the Process Program. You are the community manager of the Process Program and have done a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
Which we talked about many, many times on this podcast already on social media. But it's pretty cool to see you come full circle now and be on this podcast, but no longer as a guest.
Yeah.
Or a client, I should say, but actually a part of the team. So how's it been for you since joining the team?
Pretty wild. I mean, I'm coming from a corporate background for like 7 years, and before that I was a teacher. So very structured in my career, like salaried, stable, and everything like that. And now it's like
No money, not stable.
I'm so unstable right now, man. Don't even ask. But I'm in charge of everything that I do. So I'm as busy as I want to be, which is like it can be very good or very bad. I think that's what the experience is like for anyone who jumps into that from such a structure that I was in. So there's been a lot of struggle with that, but I think I've come out the other end of that feeling really, really good.
What have some of the struggles been?
First was, I'm married, I'm a father, and we have a home. So we have to pay for it every month. So there's that immediate pressure of like, oh, I can't chill that long at all, actually, because I need to put food on the table. I need to, make sure that there's a roof over our heads. So walking away from a really stable salary where that is never something I need to think about, that being money, and going to a situation where there's no guarantee of salary or anything like that month to month, that was the biggest one. So then it was like, very much a fear-based mentality of what I need to do to go into getting a client, to go into freelancing. And I think it just kind of turned around when things kind of naturally fit into place, like seeing an opportunity that I saw with the process programming of how I could be in the team and how much I've contributed as a subscriber, I believe, and how I could kind of help add value to the team and to a community that I very much appreciate and kind of helped me a lot in my last 3 years, COVID and all things considered.
And how about that shift from the corporate world and the teaching world into this new role?
It's different. I mean, I guess the biggest difference is there is not that like bureaucratic structure, especially from the corporate world. So in terms of like your tasks and responsibilities, it's really what you make of it, in the sense that like if there's something that you want to do or something that's interesting to you, then it falls on you to do it. Also, if something needs to be done, there's not that huge corporate machine where like someone's going to get it done. It's like once you identify something that needs to get done, then you have to assume that you're the one that's going to do it. So there's very much like that small team. And also sometimes there's stuff that I'm doing on my own, right? With the process programming, I have my responsibilities, but also, I've always been, or before I left the corporate world, I was always doing, coaching. And then I put in overdrive, personal training. So that's another aspect where I had to be in charge of all my responsibilities and my schedules and, the people that I'm serving. So yeah, it's been a lot to balance, but I feel really good about it now. I think just kind of after figuring out my own schedules and what works in terms of chipping away every day at larger tasks rather than procrastinating and like doing all-nighters for certain projects, although I kind of do that still every once in a while because that's just my nature, I guess. But other than that, it's been a really cool learning experience, and the kind of impact that I have, because with the corporate world, I feel like your impact can be limited because, it's like you're working for a global corporation or a brand or something like that. So it's hard to see the impact that you're making on a direct basis. But now, with clients, with the team, with the podcast, with our education part of the company, I can see the impact that I'm making like immediately, which is really rewarding.
So maybe a quick rundown on what are you doing? What are your job responsibilities?
Yeah. So number one, the biggest responsibility is community manager for the process education. So our individual coaching course, which I guess by the time that this episode comes out, it will be like maybe one more week before our first cohort in January 8th begins. So putting that all together into a website, into an educational platform, contacting people to join the course or answering questions about the course, fielding questions of people currently on the course who are affiliate coaches, answering their questions and kind of troubleshooting their issues they're having on the platform. So that's one thing. Then there's producing this podcast, which is another job in itself of getting guests, getting snippets from the episodes, creating the titles and descriptions, and kind of coordinating research, giving questions to you before we get a guest on the episode, making sure that they have a basis for what the episode is going to be like. What else? Talking to subscribers and reaching out to them when they first join, whether it's our premium subscribers or regular subscribers, giving them a shout on WhatsApp and saying, hey, I'm Chris. Welcome to the community. This is where we are in your training plan. If you have any questions, come to me. Or if you're a premium member, go to your coach, and then just answering questions there. And then just, I guess, little things. We had a staff white elephant during the Christmas season, and I guess I coordinated that because that was fun. Little things like that.
Yeah, I think I saw it very quickly after you joined, like really where your strengths lie, and I think anything to do with people. I think that was something you were doing for us. I always joked that you were our employee that we never hired when you remember the process.
Yeah.
Because, you would always be talking about the process, telling the world about, what we were doing and how much you loved us. You were always on the Water Cooler, which is like our online chat forum for our online programs. You'd respond to people's questions. People would ask questions to the coaching team.
Yeah.
And before we can even get there, Chris Twalzon has responded already.
Yeah.
So that highlighted a few things straight away. It was just like, your love for what we were doing and who we were.
Right.
But also anything to do with people.
Yeah.
And your communication, community, building relationships is something like you have a very unique talent in. And I think you really like doing that. And so the more and more we've worked together, in asking you about, what do you want to do? Any ideas? For example, the athlete camp meeting we had yesterday. Hey, Chris, what would you like to do as a part of this? It's always, now I'm seeing it. I'm able to predict what you're going to come forward with.
Cool.
And it's like, this is what, you do that better than anyone else. Cool. And it's really cool to have someone who has that unique skill set within our team.
I mean, and I like to be in that way predictable because I'm very comfortable being personable, and I'm genuinely interested in people's stories and sharing that to a wider audience, because I think everyone has a unique story, and everyone deserves a time to shine to share their story. And if I can be a platform for that or their sounding board, then that's great. Which brings us to this episode. So you want to give us a little premise of what we're doing here?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So we're going to be talking about leadership today. And the idea for the conversation came from a number of people, I guess, who'd written in, whenever we'd put a poll out on Instagram to our listeners and said, give us some questions on a Q&A.
Yeah.
And there's always been recurring themes and questions around leadership. So I guess this is coming from people, from two people. Number one, it's coming from leaders in their own right. So people who are captains of sports teams, they are gym owners like myself, or they're just managing teams in other industries and other businesses. Seen a lot of that. And then another one is people who have a leader, whether it's a manager or it's a boss, it's a CEO, it's a captain, and are asking me questions on, I guess my styles, what I would do in certain situations, maybe even just kind of venting. Here's what I'm experiencing with my leader. Have you got any advice? So it has definitely been a recurring theme. And I think that has perhaps come from well, the obvious fact that I'm in a position of leadership, I guess, in the sense that, I'm the owner of Coastal Fitness and the process programming.
Yeah.
And that's probably quite obvious for those who know the organization, listen to the podcast, follow me on social media. But I also do post about leadership quite a lot because that has been, and it's not just a 15-year journey for me since I started Coastal. I had many leadership opportunities and positions before that, as an athlete. So leadership has always been something I think about a lot. And for sure, as Coastal Fitness and the journey there has gone on, it's an area that I have wanted to upskill myself in because, I spoke about the time, multiple times within my Coastal Fitness journey where, the team grew too big for my leadership, where I was not able to execute and do my job well.
Okay.
And it would kind of not end catastrophically, but there would be this breaking point. And, I would always sit back and reflect and be like, why did this happen? And it was always in the way that I viewed it, something that I could have done better.
Okay.
And it really came down to sometimes me as a person and needing to evolve and grow up, I guess, in a way, or adapt, I should say. And sometimes it was just immature leadership, I should say. It's like I just didn't have the tools or the knowledge or the wisdom to know how to handle different people, different situations. Right. And, the cracks would start to show and eventually they would break. So because I post and talk about that journey of mine quite a lot, I think that maybe attracts other people to have those conversations with me. And then, there was a question that came through, a very specific question quite recently, which is around the idea of be respected or be feared. Okay. What is my opinion on that as a leadership style, and which one do I adopt? And so I thought that question being very specific, okay, I think we've got enough questions now that have come through that this is clearly something that people want to hear about, or at least a discussion to be about.
Okay, and that's what we're going to be doing today. Like I said, part of why I'm conducting this interview is because I want to hear that story, and I want to get into the details of it and the experiences and the moments of your journey of leadership, but also even from my own perspective. In the corporate world, I did take on leadership roles. I was in leadership roles when I was teaching as well, and those were its own structures of managing a team. At home, I'm a dad. So I'm the patriarch, so I guess I'm a leader, but in reality, that's my wife. She leads the family. But anyway, that's a different conversation. And I also coach at a gym in China where I'm at in Shenzhen, and I lead that team of coaches for PD and for writing the programming and stuff like that. So I'm very curious about your approaches and your perspectives to leadership, because like you mentioned, everyone is going to be in some form or fashion in relationship to a leader, whether that's you yourself leading others or you answering to a leader or manager or a boss or what have you. So it's going to be always a part of someone's life. So you're ready to just kind of dive into this?
Yeah. And I would just say I guess you have been working with me now for some time. Yeah. So, if you've got questions or thoughts or observations on, what you've experienced with me, good, bad, ugly, I'd love to hear that as well.
Okay. That's cool. All right. I have a little green notebook because I get really distracted with technology. So I'm just going to ask questions.
I like that about
from
you.
A little notebook. I appreciate it. So a leader compliments the people that he's going to be talking to.
Rule number one.
So number one, I have a few questions. And the first one is, what is, if you can remember, the first time you were ever in a leadership position, and how did that go? And when I'm saying first time, we can talk about childhood, when you're in sports, or I don't know, in student government, whatever at all.
Student government, that has never been a part of my life. But what I will say is, I think the first memory that jumps to mind is sport. So the two main sports I played as a youngster were rugby and football. Football being soccer ball for you, kicking the round ball. So I would just say that I've had a natural tendency, I feel, ever since I can remember, to want to be a leader. So, it's like in class, teacher breaks you into groups and says, okay, work on this group project. I would just take the role. I would just take the leadership position.
Okay.
Not that I was good at it, but it was just because I wanted to assume that role. And I hated it when no one took the leadership role.
Okay.
So sometimes it would be like, okay, someone step up and take control. And it would feel like minutes would go by. It was probably more like seconds, and no one would step up, and I'd be like, right, come on, we gotta get moving in this, and I would just put my hand up and do it. So I feel like I've always done that. Whether it's, I mean, typically that happens more when it's in an area that you feel comfortable, confident, and knowledgeable in.
Mm.
But I've also done it in areas where I have zero confidence and knowledge in. Like I'm in a French class and I could speak like 3 words, and I'm not putting in the work, and everyone's way better than me. I'm still taking the leadership position.
For what reason?
Oh, just because I wanted to. It was just like, why not do it? I ran for, and I think also this is me reflecting now for the very first time. I think a lot of times I would take leadership positions, sometimes because I would love the responsibility and challenge that comes with leadership. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, quite like being very honest here, I just wanted the title. I just wanted to be seen as a leader. Like there was a time, this sounds awful actually when I talk about this, and my friends joke about this all the time. But we had like a head of house at our school. So we have houses, or they were called dynasties in my school. And it was the last year of secondary school, so you're about 17, 18 years old here. Okay. And they'd asked the year group or our class, who would like to be the head of house, and like one girl put her hand up.
Also, like as an American, this all sounds like, I'm not sure if it's
so weird.
Well, I don't know if this is a British thing or like I think houses thing.
Are quite yeah. It's like a Hogwarts. It's basically like Gryffindor.
So what does that entail?
So a house. So if you're a part of a house, every year group, the year group is split up into houses. So basically, like you might have an inter house sports day where you represent your house in your different year group, or the best of all the year groups represent the house, and at the end of the year you have like the championship house. So like Gryffindor is the example of a house.
Just
different age groups.
Lay the Harry Potter on me.
There you go. I'm not even a Harry Potter fan, but I'm surprised I remember Gryffindor. So anyhow, this one girl put her hand up and said, I'd like to be head of house. And the fact that she had no one competing with her for the position, I would just put my hand up and I was like, I want to run for head of house.
Oh, geez.
I had no idea what head of house even entailed. I actually didn't want to do the head of house. Like I thought it was back then, like, being like a stupid, arrogant jock. I just thought it was like a position for losers and nerds, basically. But I'm like, I'm going to challenge this person because I don't want her to get an easy ride through it. So I did it and I won. I got the vote to be the head of house. Poor girl. Like, I think we've reflected on this, like, in our university years. I apologize to her. I was like, that was such a dick move.
Before you put your hand up, could you identify her as being a good head of house?
No, she would have been a terrible head of house. Maybe that was subconsciously why I was like, I'm not going to let this girl lead me because this is going to be my house, right? Gosh. So I basically got the position and I did nothing. I was a terrible head of house.
Okay.
But that was an example of I purely just wanted to be the leader.
Yeah.
I wanted to be seen as like the victorious winner, to be leading my troops, and then I actually did zero leading and was awful.
So what I'm hearing that's like really interesting about that story is like, I can't tell if there's how much of this is like pride, how much of this is an insecurity, how much of this is just an opportunity to shine.
I would say in this case, this was part ego for sure. Mm-hmm. This was part like wanting to be liked.
Yeah.
Like at secondary school, I assumed the role of like the jock / the funny guy.
Okay.
Who would just like, I just wanted to get the most amount of laughs, but I also really wanted to be liked by everyone. Mm. So I was the jock douchebag, but I wasn't the bully. Okay. If that makes sense. I was like the wannabe loved by everyone jock. Yeah, I know. I was a rare breed.
When I was in high school where I was like bullied myself, and I was like, I'm pretty sure they thought they meant well.
No. I would like jokingly bully, but then I would always make sure I go to that person and make sure they were okay. Right, and like, I'd never actually want to cause hurt on anyone.
Good.
Part insecurity, part wanting to be liked. Part just like I liked the challenge of like trying to run for something, and like winning a vote. I'm very
it's a competition.
It's competition, right. I guess there's a competitive side to it. Yeah. So I guess that's one first example of like, thinking back to leadership. So sometimes I would just take those positions because maybe I was just operating out of insecurity, wanting to be liked, wanting to be popular. You know, I had this vision in my head that the leader is kind of like the ruler of the roost, the most popular, the loved.
So what it sounds like too is like that version may not have been your mature version of leadership.
For sure, 100%. Right? A very infant, immature version of it.
And then was there a moment where you realized that and you needed to adjust?
Well, I would just say like around the same time in sport, it wasn't like that. In sport, I would think I was often picked to be a leader, especially probably more in my teenage years. I think, in my more adolescent years playing sport, I started playing sport, like every week a lot, probably from the age of 6 onwards, which is really when like mini sport starts in Hong Kong, football and rugby. And I would say that, when we got into the teenage years, I became a lot more confident, and I definitely had developed like a high skill set in rugby and football, more so in rugby, that I probably just showed leadership qualities. But my leadership qualities then were like, I would just lead the way through my actions, right? So it was like my style of leadership as, the Hong Kong under-19s rugby captain, a Hong Kong under-16 rugby captain, would be like, I want to lead by example by being in the trenches.
Yeah.
So I would like put my body on the line. I would go 110%. I would like, I would never back out of any challenge in the hope that would then reverberate into my team. They want to do the same.
Oh, okay. Is that regardless of you having a chance to be a leader or not? You just wanted to do that for your team?
Yeah. Well, I think coaches saw potential in me.
Okay.
So it was that I would always be selected to be a leader because of those things. I think it was because I played with my heart on my sleeve type thing. And I think they thought that was a very admirable quality. But I would say, like, when I look back on my leadership style in sport, even as an adult playing, professional rugby, when I had captaincy positions for the national team and for club teams, I wish I had the leadership skills and qualities that I have now. I wish I had it back then. Like I could have been way better. But back then I just thought leader was just like, get angry, shout. I was very much more like authoritarian.
Do you remember any specific things you've ever said?
Oh mate, so many
like
that I'm not ashamed, that I'm not proud of.
Well, not so much of that, but it's like sometimes you say something in the heat of the moment that's just so dumb or so silly or just so like off the mark.
Well, I just remember like my, captaining the Hong Kong under-19s and 16s teams, and captaining my school side and captaining my club side all at the same time.
Okay.
My team talks would just be like how many times I could say the F word, and like to the point where my vocal cords are ripping. And this is before a game's even started, and it was just all about aggression and anger. It was like hit them hard, smash them, like send them to hospital.
Did that resonate with the team, you think?
Oh, I think it fired them up. I mean, we had championship winning teams like in all the divisions. Like we were a very successful team, and I think that probably worked at that point in time. But I think also like, looking at my models of leadership at the time, like, you didn't have YouTube back then, so you couldn't watch like these documentaries that follow leaders around now, and they're very humble, very gracious, very emotionally intelligent. I would just see the England rugby team in the change room before, and you'd have or American football teams like smashing helmets with each other before they step out in the field. That's what I saw as leadership in the sport that I played. And so I just emulated that, thinking that that's just what every leader did. They just got really angry and just got everyone else really angry. And it was a pretty aggressive sport. So that kind of made sense. Yeah. Right. And so when I captained football teams, I would also be very aggressive, but then you can't be aggressive in football because you get yellow card and red card and get sent off. So that was something I was realized. I can't just be a brute. Like, I was hard to believe now, but I was more of a brute player when I was playing rugby in my younger years. Okay. You couldn't do that in football. So the interesting thing is, I'm probably accelerating your question now, is that when I started Coastal Fitness, I didn't start at wanting to be a leader. I just started as a one-man band, right? Coastal Fitness started just as me. There was no other employees. Right. And after about a year, then I started hiring people. I just found myself in a leadership position. I didn't start Coastal thinking I want to be a leader.
But then, like, I guess the strange thing about hearing that is if you're going to take on people to be on the team of this company that you created, wouldn't you be the leader? Like,
I just didn't have the foresight. I didn't know how Coastal Fitness would evolve. It was just really, it's like, I'm going to be Ed the coach, but I'm not going to call my company Ed the coach. It's going to be something bigger than that. It's going to be called Coastal Fitness. Okay. And who knows, maybe one day I hire people. Maybe one day I own a gym. Maybe one day I have an overseas business. Like I didn't have any of those plans. Okay. So I didn't know how it would evolve. I just assumed it. But when I did eventually start hiring staff for Coastal Fitness, and I'm 22 at this point in time, still captaining sports sides, being like the angry dictator. I started running Coastal Fitness as an angry dictator. Oh. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Like I would say the complete opposite end of the spectrum to how I run it now. So it was very interesting in my early days of running the business. I basically ran it like a rugby team. Okay. And that worked to a certain point in time.
I'm sure it also
until
attracted certain people too.
For sure. It worked when my first employees were all my friends and my teammates. Like I played football with one of them. I played rugby with Ant forever. The other one was part of the Hong Kong rugby team as well. The other one was a Hong Kong rugby. Like 4 out of our 5 first employees were all Hong Kong players. Babs was a Hong Kong hockey captain, so she just got it. So it was like we were all just athletes who'd grown up in that same era, who'd played with each other in sports teams. So it worked. Yeah. But the moment there was new people coming in from like different backgrounds, different environments, different cultures, that's when it all changed.
Yeah, because when you're I guess as a leader and you're hiring people that vibe with you or that you know personally, if you're hiring on that basis and not so much like, I think we need an accountant, based on the need of the company, then like it helps fill certain requirements, but not other ones when we're talking about managing a business, right?
But I mean, who's to say that couldn't have been successful? Yeah. Like had I just hired people, I guess what that style of leadership bred was, because of who I was at that point in time, was like I didn't take feedback. It was like my way or the highway. Yeah. I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't humble. And so what you end up doing when you're that style of leader is that you just basically hire a bunch of yes men, people who are just going to follow your rules and follow your processes. Yeah. Even if they don't want to, even if they have really valid things to add, which I know that my employees back then did, the way that I was basically funneled them to have to be that type of person if they wanted to be in the organization. And then maybe I know there are some organizations that are going to flourish with that style of leadership. Sure. Perhaps there's an organization that has job responsibilities that don't require much thought, maybe very manual processes. It's just like tick the same boxes every single day. The manager or leader isn't looking for input from employees. It's just like, do your job and get out. I mean, that's not an organization I want to be a part of or that I think many people would enjoy. But if that's what the organization that you want to run and that's the job that needs to get done, then like a dictatorship style leadership, style of leadership could be really effective. So that's just not what I wanted.
And then I guess the reason I want to stop you right there is because, ever since joining this team back in, I guess, August, it's December now, so it's been a good 4 months. I wouldn't say that's the style of the team that we're in. Otherwise, if that was the style, I wouldn't be here. So, as concisely as you can, how do you contrast what that was then to where you are now as a leader?
Honestly, like my style of leadership has just evolved as I have evolved as a human. So the style of leadership that I was using back then was just a very honest reflection of who I was as a person, like insecure, hence couldn't take feedback, wasn't vulnerable, wasn't honest with myself. So therefore would create a facade around everything else. I had no idea authentically who I was as well. I was just living every day wearing a different mask, and most of the masks that I was wearing at that point in time had come from rugby. So very macho, very boisterous, very aggressive. Being a leader in that arena as well meant like I was basically a dictator.
And like criticism was like a challenge.
Yeah,
right?
and admitting weakness or struggle was for pussies. Like that's really it, right? Yeah. And so because of all of that. It's not, I wouldn't call it trauma, but just the environment that I had grown up in led me to think that that's the person that I was. Actually, even like when I look back, I know that deep down underneath all those masks, like a lot of who I am now existed back then. Yeah. I just couldn't see it because the masks were covering it so much. Okay. And so, in my own journey of self-discovery and unmasking Ed Haynes and starting to find who I really wanted to be, and a lot of that was evolution as well, me evolving the person and not liking certain aspects of myself and wanting to change and making that change. As I became more empathetic, as I became more vulnerable, as I became more honest, as I dropped the ego, as I started to like really find the authentic version of me, all those things, all those characteristics then started to show in my leadership. So I went from like one end of the spectrum of like angry, aggressive dictator to probably like at one point so far on the other end of the spectrum that it was probably like a little bit too nice and a little bit
overcompensated.
Yeah, I probably overcompensated without even realizing it. But it was just like looking back on who that person was, and I just hated, didn't like it. I didn't like how it made me feel, and I didn't like the ripple effect that it had on my team. I didn't like the ripple effect that it had in the relationships that I had. I didn't like the ripple effect that it had in my community, and I was just like, I don't want this, and I have to change. And the change, you can read all the management books, all the leadership books about how to manage, but at the end of the day, the management style that fits the best is the one that just feels right, and it should feel easy. You know what I mean? And it was hard being the angry dictator, because it was like I was having like put on a front all the time to do it, whereas like where I'm at now in this season of life and all the work that I put in, it feels very easy because it's just me.
And like you're comfortable in your own skin without that mask. Like, do you feel like this is who you are?
There's still 100% a lot of like leadership skills I've had to learn, and there's a lot of things I think about still quite consciously. You know, when you're met with maybe a confrontation or you know, something happening in the workplace that needs to be addressed. It's not automated. It's not just like, oh, I know exactly what to do. I'm getting better at it, but there's still many times where I really have to think, what is the right thing to say here? Like, how do I want to respond? What is my natural inclination? What is that? And what do I actually want to do? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I mean, you've said it in like meetings before. It's like, you'll tend to want to do something, or you'll just say like, I don't know if this is the right thing. Like you tell me, like, what's your feedback, where you're comfortable not being confident about a decision,
which is so contrasting to younger me.
So like, if we're talking about giving this a takeaway to someone who's listening to this as a leader or becoming a leader or is, you know, at odds with a leader, what would you say were the main things or books you read or people you interacted with that helped you see that problem that created that change?
Well, I always talk about the very first ever self-help book that I read that made like a massive impact in my life, and it was actually about leadership. It was called The Advantage, and I mean, I don't think it's the best book out there. It was just really what I needed to read at that point in time. I was just at a point in my life, and my life really being consumed by my business and leadership, where I was just lost. I was like burnt out. I was not happy. There was just a lot of like negativity in my life. I don't know. Would I have been diagnosed as like some form of mild depression? Probably, had it been like, you know, now. But I just had no answers, and I was like just so ready to throw in the towel. I would say that I was just so ready to throw in the towel and just ditch the whole Coastal Fitness thing, literally give away my business that I've been building for, you know, 6-7 years, and just be like, I can't handle this anymore.
Whoa. Okay, so it was that bad.
It was that bad. Yeah. There was multiple times, you know, like I'd be downstairs on a park bench outside, like head in my hands on the board, on the brink of tears, but no tears because I was too masculine, macho to ever cry.
Did anyone know this?
Did anyone notice?
No, was anyone aware?
I think I had one of my colleagues at the time who was like, you know, one of my best friends. You know, I would quite frequently when he would be there, I would share those feelings with him. But it was more feelings of frustration and anger versus me being upset and sad and unfulfilled. I didn't have the emotional intelligence then to really unpack my feelings. It was just like I would just clump it all and just say I'm angry. But really, like, there was just so many unprocessed emotions underneath all that.
So then the book came to you from a friend?
So the book came to me from a friend. I literally just connected with him recently because I posted about this book, and I'd said, I think it was a sound clip or something from a talk that I did recently. And he messaged me straight away and said, I still remember giving you that book. And it was on a holiday, and he was just running for headmaster at his school, and he basically said, hey, I know you've owned this business and starting to grow and go places. I read this book and it made a massive difference to me. So I would say that was like the first book that made me see that I could be different. That there was solutions to all the problems I was facing. But really, like, rather than just bury my head in more management leadership books, I went down like the self-help book. It was like, okay, actually, the reason my business is struggling and the reason I'm not being a good leader is actually because of me. It's not Ed the leader. It's like Ed the person. Like my values, my principles, like my beliefs. That's the stuff that needs addressing right now. And that was like, I mean, that's a quest that's still happening now, but you know, that was like an intense, you know, 3 to 4 years of like serious isolation, self-reflection, a lot of like
hard conversations
with myself, You know, like I really removed myself from friendship groups. I started saying no to things. I started just feeling like I needed just time to process.
Yeah.
And like there was a lot of growth that happened in probably those 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And, you know, my team who've been with me, who are still with me now, who are part of this company, like Babs's, Ants, you know, Emma's, even Tammy, you know, she probably caught the tail end of it, you know, have all said that, you know, as I went deeper and deeper in my own self-healing journey, my leadership just kept on evolving and changing. And I didn't even know it was just me being me.
Yeah.
And wherever I was in that chapter of life, and just like bringing that to my team.
And like being vulnerable.
Yeah, that was a huge thing. I think that was what a lot of people say was a massive thing that made a massive difference. And I knew that the moment I started practicing vulnerability, I saw the power that it had in connecting and building better relationships with people, and the power that had on my team. Because at the end of the day, you know, as a leader, you know, your vibe attracts your tribe. We talk about that all the time.
Right.
And so if I'm going to be, you know, an emotional, angry, aggressive leader, I'm probably going to attract angry, emotional, aggressive people.
Yeah.
And that becomes the culture of the organization, which is kind of what happened. And so you need, you know, what I realized was that as I was evolving as a person, that had a pretty immediate trickle effect onto the organization. So then,
I mean, if you would let me describe
Yeah.
what that's like. So on the outside, right? So joining this organization, in terms of what I see in your leadership quality and also in the organization itself, you're very much coordinating, right? You're sitting at the head of the table when we do our team meetings, and you start off and you give us our agenda for the day, and then we go around the room. But it's also very clear everyone has their own responsibilities, and they lead in their own ways, you know, whether it's something that they are fired up about and they're passionate about and they excel in. For example, Tammy's really great at nutrition, right? So those points she shares often and frequently, and she loves to talk about it. Even something too, like Andrew, he does our goals for the month, and like he's our goals guy, and we love that he can go up on the blackboard, write up everyone's notes, review if we've passed or failed our goals for the month. Karan, he loves to crunch numbers, and you know, he's doing pretty awesome analytics for us. He just recently talked about our testing data for all of our Live, Perform, Compete, and Elite members, and even, you know, just for everyone around the world that's on our subscription model. So within your leadership, I see leadership within the team as well. And even with me, it's like if I want to do something, you know, you're talking about the Hong Kong athlete camp, and I want to do something in terms of podcasting and interviewing people who come to the camp. You're letting me run with it, you know. And it's not even this whole thing. Oh, you're letting me do this. It's like, no, I want to do it, so I'm going to do it. So that's the type of leadership that I'm seeing, is where it's very much collaborative in nature, and I feel like everyone has that opportunity to, you know, however you want to call it, rise to the challenge, step up to the plate, where they can really lead with something that they're passionate about and they're fired up about, and then make it a contribution to the organization. You know, not so much just for you, right? Like, it's not to impress you as our leader, as our boss, to get, you know, to knock out those KPIs, but to like make impact. So that's
I wanted to jump in and just say that's really what it's about. It's about how can we all contribute to the greater good of the organization.
Yeah.
Whereas before, it was the Ed show. It was like, and you know, I think a lot of leaders struggle with this.
Yeah.
Especially people who come from backgrounds like I did. But it's like this refusal to let go.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the leader wants to remain in total control, total power. They want to be the face of the business. They want to do everything. They have this inability to hand over tasks. And what they end up doing is basically taking on way too much. They can't do anything well. And, you know, they basically, their own health and mental and physical health, you know, then becomes a detriment because of the way that they have an inability to basically let go. And that was me. Like, actually, the core of so much of my unhappiness, you know, talking about the previous me, was because I had this inability to let go. And I wanted, there's so many different things that contribute to that, but I wanted to be the person who could do everything.
Yeah.
I had an inability to trust others that they could do a job, because I would think they're not doing a job good enough.
Yeah.
I didn't have the skills to teach. I also didn't have the time. I didn't have the time to be able to pass on the knowledge that I had to anyone else, because I just had put so much on my plate because I wanted to do all of it. I just couldn't train anyone else up to do, even if I wanted to do what I could do. And right, so what happens is that you as a leader become burnt out, unfulfilled. You start doing a poor job with everything because you can't do a good job with everything. The rest of your team, they're not upskilling, they're not developing, they're not growing because they're not doing anything else other than the one thing you gave them at the start. And then as a result, the overall goal of the organization growing and impacting more people, whatever your mission is, that doesn't happen because you can't do it as a one-man band. And so, the quote, like, if you want to go fast alone, or if you want to go far, go together. Like that's something that I think about all the time. And, I realize that, you hear all these quotes a fucking million times, a team is greater than the sum of all its parts. All these, you can think of 100 other quotes that basically say the same thing, which is how important it is to leverage your team. But it took me a long time to get to that position to actually see that, okay, maybe there are people here. And a big part of this was because I was unable to be vulnerable, which basically meant that I had to admit that I wasn't good at something and that there was potentially someone in this room who's better than me at it. And if you can't do that as a person, how are you ever going to delegate and, give leadership opportunities to other people? And so now that's all I'm doing. It's like I'm looking for ways to give people within this team more opportunities to take on more, to do things they love and to do things they're good at. And that isn't always, oh, Chris, you're really good at this, just take this. Sometimes it's like, Chris, I see potential for you to do this. Let me hire you and train you and give you all the skills so that one day you can take this thing on, right? Sometimes it's just easy. Like you've come into this company, you had a very strong skill set that you felt very confident in, that you could bring to the table right away and elevate us. I didn't need to train you really at all to do those things. It was like, well, here's a few little things, here's a few little processes, and Chris, you just go ahead and do that thing. There are going to be other things where like I'm going to need to train you and give you the skill sets and give you the tools to be able to have you then excel in it.
Sure.
But that's ultimately the goal. Like if you want to impact the organization and grow that thing, then you have to give that stuff on to other people. And so I love that now. Like I think it's a sign of strong leadership is that when your people are successful, they say they did it all themselves. I think that's
is there
really
like
cool
a recent moment where you thought about that, where you gave someone a task, where someone said they wanted to lead in something and you saw them flourish in it?
Mate, every day. Like I genuinely see it every day. When we sit around on a Monday and we have team meetings and people talk about their responsibilities and what they're doing and they give updates. Like I'm seeing that every single time. I'm seeing people like taking ownership, taking responsibility and taking, having pride in what they do and being able to see that all the time is like, I literally just, like there's so many times I see it. I can't even pick out, individual examples because it's just something that's so embedded in our culture here. Is there something that you saw recently? Can you think of something?
Monday. I like him a lot and I respect his work ethic. Nico was updating us on the floor space at Coastal because we crush PRs and we slam bars here a lot. So the flooring is kind of messed up. So there has to be a contractor that comes in to redo the flooring. And this has been a bit of a pain in the ass lately because if you're going to do the flooring, that means part of the floor is not going to be available. That means because you have concrete that needs to dry. So it's gonna mess things up in terms of like we have to accommodate for this and we won't be able to use this space for some time. But he's always been like updating us on like what's going well, what's not going well. The contractor backed out. We have a new contractor in. Here are your dates. And it was just like, whoa, like I personally don't have the wherewithal to plan something like that. Not only is Nico willing to do this, but like
he loves it.
He loves it. And that's like that's also something that I see just in like the little details. So like for me, when I see someone that's like super excited about the little details of something and that makes me excited for this thing that I have I don't connect with that. I'm suddenly connecting with it because I'm hearing it in their voice. That's when it's like, oh damn, you're meant to do this.
But doesn't it just also gives you so much trust in
100%.
in what you're achieving as a team.
Knowing
that, because you have your responsibilities that you're pouring your heart and soul into, to give and deliver your best. Knowing that you're then seeing 10 other people around the room doing their own unique thing
Yeah.
that's contributing to the greater good of the company.
Right.
It just gives you that real feeling that like the boat is moving in the right direction and it's moving in the same direction. So I think that's why we have those opportunities to talk about it. Because I think it is really important that we all showcase and share as a group the things that we're doing versus giving responsibilities and then people, hiding away and doing it, in the dark corner and no one ever knowing about it.
For better or for worse. Like another example. I mean, it's an example because it's also a good example. So bear with me here. You released a 12-week squat program, and you're the master programmer, and you're the one who writes LPCE programming. So your programming is excellent. And every month, there was a time when we were talking about the number of subscribers. Every month we do talk about that, build, live, perform, compete, high rocks programs, nutrition challenges, stuff like that. And we'd get numbers and we'd see like numbers going up, numbers going down, numbers stabilizing, but usually like, on average growth. And I think one of the months, the 12-week squat program, it was like 2 people. and it was like, if I were in those shoes, like it would take a lot of like, eating of my pride to have to say that. And I probably would like kind of tuck it into the corner. But you're like, yeah, I mean, they can't all be like, not everything that I write can be perfect. Who can do that? So it was nice to see that you were like, yeah, like that was kind of a dud, or I probably need to revisit that or something. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's like, if I'm going to sit here and say, one of the things I always tell the team is there's absolutely nothing wrong with making a mistake. In fact, like I want to encourage a team of people who are willing to make mistakes. I think that's where a lot of like growth and innovation come from.
Yeah.
And if we all just sit in our own little safety zones and aren't afraid or too afraid to make mistakes, we're probably never going to progress. So if I'm going to say that that's something that's important to this company, that means that I need to be willing to make mistakes. Okay. And when I make mistakes, what I say to the team all the time is nothing wrong with making a mistake, but there is something wrong when you don't admit that you made a mistake. And so if I make mistakes, I have to be the one that's going to admit the mistake as well. And that goes for, all of our values up on that wall.
Yeah.
And, I'm very conscious of that I think, I always have to lead by example. I can't say that this is a value that we believe in, or this is a value that I believe in, and then act in a way that doesn't align with that value. And sometimes I do. Sometimes it would just be a Freudian slip and I'll just forget and I'll say something like, maybe I won't take ownership for something, or I'll like point blame jokingly to someone else. So something like even really small, like who left the packet of sweets here? And it might be me and I'd forgotten. What's really cool now, which is confirmation that our culture is continuing to grow, is that someone will call me out on it.
Okay.
And they'll be like, Ed, you're not taking ownership for this thing. And I'm like, I fucking love that. Like I love that you're calling me out, because that's how a culture is upheld.
Yeah.
A culture is not upheld by the person at the top telling everyone about what they did wrong and why they did it. The culture is upheld when everyone is holding each other to the culture and to the values and to the beliefs. And I think that's what, I'm starting to see that happen slowly over time. But I think a lot of people come into this organization and like, hang out with the team. And a lot of people say to me like, wow, your team like takes a piss out of you a lot. And
that is true.
And I love that. Karan has a really good quote. And I can't remember what the quote is, but it's like, those who can't be laughed at can't be feared, or something like that, something along those lines. But basically talking about the importance that like, like we're all just human beings at the end of the day. And, a big part of how I want to run this business and the culture that I want to have is like, I want us to be friends. Like the whole idea of like, a boss can't be friends with employees, or don't get close to your subordinates. Like that's bullshit in my opinion. Like all the greatest things that we've achieved, all the great things we've achieved in this company have come from the fact that I think we have really tight-knit relationships. Yes, it does make it hard when things sometimes get a little bit too interwoven, or you've got to have hard conversations, or you have to, worst case scenario, fire someone. Yeah, for sure. A really close, friendly relationship makes those things harder to do, but the good severely outweighs the bad. And so that's something that I always want. And so, with my friends, like I can't take myself too, I don't want to take myself too seriously. Sure. I like a joke. I like taking the piss out of other people, which means like I want people to take the piss out of me as well. And I want us to have that culture within here. But obviously when it's time to have the serious conversation, you just got to be able to flick the switch and know how to do that.
So the part that you said that I really want to ask about is the whole idea of what kind of genuine relationship can you actually have with your team, with your subordinates, or if you're on the team with your leader. How can you have a genuine relationship if the nature of the relationship has certain, lines that are drawn, right? Like someone's writing someone else's check, someone's reviewing someone else. So, of course there are boundaries in every relationship. There's boundaries between me and my wife, there's boundaries between me and my children, there's boundaries between me and my neighbor. If there are set boundaries between an employee and their leader, how are you able to create a genuine relationship anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I have this conversation a lot because, my fiance asks me about it all the time. She says, wow, you're so open with your team that you not feel like you're too open. Or, even on social media, like, wow, you just share everything on social media like you would be sharing something to like your very intimate partner. How do you do that? So I think that's kind of where I would start with this question, which is like, I want to be totally honest at all times, because on a selfish level, it's just the most freeing way to live. Knowing that you don't have to hold anything back, that you're not embarrassed, you're not afraid, you're not scared to share anything, and the only way you can get to that point is that you just got to be so assured of yourself and confident in you that you can say anything and not be afraid of what others are going to think. And I think genuinely that's where I am at in my life.
Okay.
I wasn't for the majority of it, but that's just where I'm at. So for me, it's kind of therapy, when it comes to this, you're in a conversation, you're in a meeting, or you're posting something and you've got this like resistance to want to post something or say something, or you got resistance to want to speak how you really feel. I love the idea of like leaning into resistance.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, this resistance is telling me that there is something that like needs to be addressed here.
You mean courage over comfort?
Courage over comfort and honesty. Honesty, right? Those are two big things, right?
These are our values, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And they serve an amazing reminder because I'm basically always facing those things. But it's like, it's therapy for me. Every time I do it, I feel better about myself. I feel like I'm leveling up in my existence. So in that regard, like, I'm going to be totally honest about everything. And I really genuinely nothing is off limits to me when it comes to talking about my experiences, my insecurities, fill in the blank.
And that's great. And I appreciate that here, especially because, in my corporate environments, a different manager would approach things differently, and I'd have to navigate the work space and my expectations and what I can and cannot say based on that, especially if I'm working in a culture that's not where I grew up in, right? I'm American in China. And what you're saying, it speaks a lot to your leadership kind of helping to cultivate a certain culture that now that you're seeing all around you. And that's a great thing. For a person who's listening, who's working in a difficult culture where maybe they're not allowed to be open, or maybe their leader isn't taking ownership over something, are there any ways that they can help guide their leader or give that feedback to their leader in order to help them see the things that they might not be seeing? Remember, you were saying yourself that there was a time when you weren't seeing the problems that were present, and then it only took some really, really dark moments for you to be able to see the hole that you're in and dig yourself out. So a person who's not the leader but on that team that needs to make the change, wants to make that change, is there anything that they can do?
Yeah, tough. And communication, just like leadership, is so situational, right? I wish there was just one golden rule that I could say this and you would fix the problem.
Sure.
There isn't, right? Just like there is no one golden way to lead a team. And I would say that my leadership style is very situational. It changes for you, and it changes for Izzy, it changes for Ant, it changes for Tammy at different points in time, for different tasks, at different stages in their life. The way that I'm going to respond and communicate and engage them is going to be different. So what I will say though is, this is the way that I look at life, is like, in nine times out of 10, I want to do whatever I can within my power to change the result. That means I got to ask myself the question, if I'm in that position, what is within my control and what is not within my control? What is within my control always is a conversation, the hard conversation, the hard conversation that most of us shy away from and never have. I want to always encourage myself and the people around me to have that conversation, because honesty always takes you one step closer to a solution. So in this case, it's, sharing that feedback with the manager. Now there's ways to do that, right?
Sure.
and again, this is where you have to read the person, but rather than telling them what's right and what's wrong and what's good and what's bad, just tell them how you feel. I think that's such a key ingredient in communication that we're all missing, is that we're trying to win, we're trying to lose, we're trying to be right, we're trying to be wrong, we're trying to tell someone they're good, we're trying to tell someone they're bad.
So you're basically putting yourself at odds from the start.
It's not about right or wrong, good or bad. It's about understanding one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's where so much conflict arises from, is this lack of desire to want to understand and more of a desire to want to be right. And if we can start communicating more based on feelings and what we're experiencing, and that's something that's personal and that's something that's subjective, that is always a really fantastic starting point. So, by basically saying like, hey, I've seen that this happened, last week, and this is just how I feel about it.
Sure.
Not that you're a bad person for doing it, or I think that's wrong and you should do this, but this is just how it made me feel. And, maybe this is something that I would like to see moving forward. What do you think? And you make it immediately a collaborative effort. And there's not many people in the world, even like angry, emotional, authoritative Ed, had that been brought to me where an employee felt that this is expressed to me that I had done something to make them feel a certain way, I probably would have been really empathetic, even though I didn't know what empathy actually meant or how to practice it consciously. Right. I would have been like, oh, like, I don't want to make you feel that way.
Yeah.
What can I do about it? So, and if you can do that, and if you do that and it doesn't change the situation and it doesn't change the environment, then maybe that's just not the right place for you. You've got to ask yourself that question then. Like, is the thing that you're experiencing with this leader, is it bearable enough? And is there enough other good things happening in my day to day that I can bear with this being a part of my life? Or if it's just so unbearable and it doesn't outweigh, or it massively outweighs everything else that's happening, then you've got to make that choice. Once you've done all that's within your control to change the situation, and if you can't, then the ball's in your court.
So like two things that are really like resonating with me there is, number one is that having that conversation is key. And one thing that I think maybe a leader or a colleague told me once was like, give yourself a 24-hour rule. If something needs to be said and you have that like innate feeling, right? Something doesn't sit well with you, or you feel like there needs to be some communication, something that needs to happen, give yourself 24 hours. Number one, to push yourself. And if you widen out that window past 24 hours, that person who didn't realize it, this case your leader, they might completely forget and move on, not know the context when you bring it up.
Yeah,
right.
Like that's like parental wisdom, right? Just sleep on it.
Yeah,
it's such like it's actually really golden advice in most cases. And what I would say, I think, what at the crux of that advice, what we're really saying is, act based on, be rational, not emotional. When the emotional brain is taken over, we have a tendency to say things that are maybe out of context. We could be hot-tempered. We could say things we don't mean.
Yeah.
Versus what time often does, it gives you an opportunity to rationalize the situation. Take emotion out of it. How do I really take how I feel about this and just look at the situation in black and white, put myself in their shoes. Often it will change your perspective and your feelings around it massively. And I think what I have become much better at is the time taken to move from emotional to rational has just shortened as I have become more emotionally mature and had more experience in this role. I'm able to do that, now actually in a matter of minutes. So rather than having to sleep on it and wait 24 hours, which I probably had to do, maybe even longer, like take a week on it is probably something I would have had to do back in the day.
Okay.
Now it's like I can just be very quick in the moment to notice if I'm emotionally charged, take a breath, take a second, and then actually think very rationally and then come out with a response, which I think is a really important skill to have as a leader. Because you can imagine if you're, as a leader, you're confronted with hard situations a lot, right? And so most of the time they're unforeseen. They can just come at you any point, any day, sometimes multiple times a day. And if you're just going to sleep on everything and say, I'm going to get back to you in 24 hours, sometimes things can't wait that long.
Well, I don't know. I think there was a time when I was managing a team of like 20 people, and they'd come to me with problems all the time. And I don't know, they just had identified me as like a problem solver or a person to vent their problems to me. It wasn't necessarily about me, but sometimes it had to do with the way I structured the team or I structured processes. But the big thing was, I said, 2 hours every Wednesday in the morning, I'll have an open door. And if you have any questions for me, come see me. And first would be just questions about, the job description or about what's coming down the pipeline the next quarter or something. And then it became kind of like Sometimes
Therapy.
it became a therapy session where it was like they told me their problems, and it's like, whoa, like that's super heavy, and how can I help you? And like their emotions would turn into my emotions, and I'd be emotionally invested in this whole thing. And my whole goal was to like help solve that. But then that became a drain on my time, a drain on my own emotions, a drain on my own mental health. Fast forward, it took me only a year to leave that position completely, and then 2 years to leave the corporate world altogether.
Yeah.
So like there's definitely like there's validity in what you're saying to you leave the emotions out of it and make it a rational decision whenever possible. But does that mean ignore emotions?
No. Actually, like what you just, I mean, don't make decisions based on emotions is what I'm saying. Sometimes that's impossible. Sometimes emotions have to be a part of it because it's making you feel a certain way.
Yeah.
But just make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to think rationally in conjunction with your emotions before you make a decision. I guess that's what I'm saying. But you know, that scenario of an employee coming to you and like opening up their heart and opening up a tin of beans, like I love that. And the reason I love that, yes, it's hard because sometimes you carry that burden as well, or you feel the emotional pain that they're experiencing. But what I love about it is that it often takes immense vulnerability.
Yeah.
It takes a special relationship for someone to open up to you. And so if that's happening on a regular basis within your team, it shows that there's people probably have a relationship which is at a level where they feel comfortable enough to do that with you, which I think is an amazing thing to have. That there's not many people, most people only have 1, 2, 3 people maybe in their circle that they do that. And if you can be one of those people, I think that's an absolute privilege. So I love that. And what I love about it is that in being able to help someone move through something like that, they are emotionally leveling up. At the end of the day, what makes, in my opinion, amazing teams are teams with high EQ, like teams with high emotional intelligence, because emotional intelligence is at the heart of so much conflict, you know, interpersonal relationships, good or bad. And if you can develop a team of people who have high levels of emotional intelligence, mate, it just makes life so much easier.
I mean, we do that pretty regularly here.
That's exactly why we do book club.
Yeah.
That's exactly why we have, you know, share your wins and losses from the week, you know, be vulnerable, be open, because in those experiences, like we are all leveling up together. And even if someone doesn't feel ready to share, and not everyone in our team shares all the time, you know, if they're even just playing a listening role and just hearing what everyone else in the room has to say, just by listening and assimilation, you are leveling up. And so I want to encourage those conversations. I always encourage the team, like, be honest, be open, be vulnerable, but you have to do it at your own speed. Like I'm not going to force you to start opening up and sharing your deepest, darkest secrets, but just know that this is a safe space. And I can't just say that. I need to show that it's a safe space by basically acknowledging vulnerability from others. It's not like words just fall on deaf ears if the actions don't support it.
Okay.
And I just know that we are going to win if we can have a team of people who are open, honest, vulnerable, open to talking about anything, open to having hard conversations, and, you know, helping each other through them. Like that for me is a championship winning team. That, you know, when you have people who are willing to like die for one another, I know that sounds really extreme in like a personal training business, but you know what I mean? Like, you know, managers would always ask their players, you know, are you willing to die for this team?
Yeah.
And if you are willing to take a bullet for the person next to you, like that says a lot about what you're willing to do for your teammates and ultimately what you're willing to do for your team. So, you know, when I think about that, that's what I want. I want a team of people who are willing to take bullets for each other. Metaphorically.
So you're going to take a bullet from me.
I'll take a metaphorical bullet for you.
Okay, cool. Good metaphor. That was great. I mean, I think there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom with that throughout this whole conversation. But I think that's a good place to end in terms of if you're not a leader, there's plenty of things that you can do to take ownership over the situation and what you can do to enact change, and that whole 9 out of 10 rule. And if you did 9 out of 10 and you gave it your all, then perhaps the environment needs to change. And that's part of the hard conversation too, right? And, you know, just like I'm sure when you were a very brash and aggressive leader, there were people who left the team to exit that scenario.
Yep.
And even, you know, now and in the future, there's going to be people who, like, the longer they're on this team, they're thinking, actually this style of leadership doesn't resonate with me. And that's okay. Right? Like,
it's totally okay.
And you know, that's how it is in any organization. You know, our parents' generations were in companies for 30 or 40 years. I think it's telling when we see people being able to turn over in 10 years or less and go on to something else that makes them truly happy. Because I think, you know, with the idea of mental health being more in the forefront, people taking those honest looks of their organizations, of their teams, of their situations, and taking a look at, how can I change this? And if I really tried my best to change this, then maybe I just need to change my situation.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what it takes at the end of the day is, as a leader, clarity on who you are and who you want to be.
Sure.
And as an employee in an organization, you got to have clarity on who you are, who you want to be, and what you want to be a part of.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you are experiencing resistance in the place that you're in, then there's clearly some misalignment.
Yeah.
There's a value or a belief in the company that you're in or the team that you're in that is not in alignment with you. And so what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Either are you going to change your values and the things that you believe in? Are you going to try and influence change in the values of the people that you're with, or just remove yourself? That's really the three options that you have. Or I guess the fourth option is you just suck it up and continue.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, I think we've all been in a situation.
There's a lot of people that are there, you know, who are just sucking it up.
I mean, that was me up until May, right?
Yeah. You sucked it up until you didn't want to suck it up anymore, you know? And then let me ask you, like, did you try change the environment that you're in?
There were, I think in some cases, yes. And in another case, I just became kind of like a corporate shell. I don't know how
so you tried to change, the change didn't happen.
Yeah.
So then you're then going to be in a position where you then have to question yourself. Should I change then?
Yeah.
Should I change to?
Yeah.
And
because then you can also just kind of coast and be like, all right, maybe it's not that important. And, you know.
Which is then sucking it up.
Well, it depends, right? Because then there's people who live their lives where work isn't their life, and that's totally fine, right? Because their family is their life. Their passions outside of work is their life. Their weekends and what they do there to enrich their life is their life. And I think, you know, there are people who can compartmentalize that, right? And that's, I'm a fan of that, and I did
me
that
too.
for a while.
You know what your priorities are.
Exactly. And
That's
then,
cool.
you know, there are organizations too where your work is your life, and that also resounds with the parts of your life. So I guess it really depends on how important this job is to you, and the work and the mission and the purpose to make that conversation.
I guess for me, it's just like the way that I see it. If I'm going to spend, you know, 9 to 12 hours of every day doing a certain thing with certain people, I kind of want to enjoy those hours.
For sure.
You know what I mean? Even if my priorities were family and other things, like, if you can find a way, I think what's stopping most people from making that change, even if they say it's not their priority, is they don't know if there is another way. Like a lot of people, I have heard people come in here and being like, wow, I didn't realize organizations could be like this. Or I've heard that about other organizations in a really positive way. And if you haven't ever experienced it, then you probably don't know if it even exists. And so therefore, like, okay, maybe having a 5 out of 10 job is okay. Yeah. Because maybe there is nothing better. Yeah. So I get it. I understand.
I mean, I guess just like with every question, the answer, it's individual to the person. It depends on your situation, depends on what's important to you. But I mean, I'm glad to have heard, you know, all the different perspectives that we can take as a leader or as a person who's working with a leader, and this idea of how the team is led. So whoever asked you that question, I hope we answered your question well. I do want to end with one thing, is a lightning round. But I'm calling this the Enlightening round.
So, nice.
So, lightning round rules.
Yeah.
But you got to give me some wisdom.
Okay. Well, pressure.
All right. First thing I want in this Enlightening round, got to be fit. It has to be fast answers in the sense that you got to be fit answers, and you can't say it depends. All right. Just give me a black or white answer.
My favorite answer.
Number 1, who is the real leader in a band?
It's got to be the lead singer.
Okay. Why?
Because it says lead in their name.
Oh, God. Okay. There's also the lead guitarist. Favorite band on that note?
Favorite band? Band. Wow. Red Hot Chili Peppers.
I knew you were going to say that. 2, NSYNC. Who is the leader of that band?
Justin Timberlake.
Okay. Who are all the members of NSYNC?
Oh, mate, you lost me now. See, all I cared about was a leader. But I know you love NSYNC because
Chazé, Kirk Kirkpatrick, Lance Bass, and Justin Timberlake. Did I say JC already? There's another guy. The other guy, sorry about that. There's another guy.
Not a real fan.
Oh, Joey Fatone.
There you go. Didn't know any of those, by the way.
They're all great.
No.
3, recommend a great book on leadership. You mentioned The Advantage. What's in
The Advantage is an amazing book. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink had a really profound impact on my life. I'm going to say Nonviolent Communication. I say it so many times, but I think every leader needs to read that book. And a book that I just reread. It was written 40 years ago.
I saw you.
And I just read. It's a 3-series book called The 1 Minute Manager. It is gold. It was gold. My dad gave me that book before when I first set up Coastal Fitness 15 years ago. He gave me all 3 books and said, Ed, these 3 books have massively helped me as a manager and as a leader in my life. I think you should read them. I skimmed through them. And I was like, this is shit. Doesn't apply to me at all. Now rereading them, I literally found them. I kept them with me everywhere I went over the last 15 years. Exact same copies.
Awesome.
Published in 1983. They're on my shelf recently. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to take those with me. It was when I went to... Where did I go?
Dubai?
With Tammy? No, to Bangkok. And I ripped through like one of them on a flight and I was like, wow, these are concepts from 40 years ago before technology and all this shit. And it all still applies. And it's like, that has been a most recent leveling up.
1 Minute Manager.
The 1 Minute Manager.
All right. Next one. Recite a favorite quote about leadership. I know you like quotes. 1 leadership quote.
And when people ask me about quotes, I always really struggle. So, yes. I want to say, no, I'm not going to say if you want to go far, go together. That's just too standard. Can we come back to that?
Sure. Shout out to a leader who impacted your life. Can be a teacher, can be a coach, can be a business mentor.
Yeah, I'm going to say Mr. Williams. He was my geography teacher, but also our football team coach. He was a pretty impactful leader. I'm going to say Dai Reese, the Hong Kong Sevens coach, and Andy Hall, the cricket club rugby coach, because he had a very unique style of leadership that I really liked. He was very soft and like there was no aggression and anger in him, which I really appreciated.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And I would say both my parents in their very unique ways. Their style of leaderships are very different to one another. My mum is probably like more the former me. My dad is probably a bit more like the me now, but I've been growing up with those two contrasts.
Oh, is your mom like, I guess you would call it a typical Asian tiger mom?
My mum, because she listens to this podcast. I would say mum is a bit of a tiger mum. She's a strong woman. I would say that, she's like,
she squats more than you.
I mean, if she trained as much as me, she'd probably squat more than me. She's actually pretty damn strong. I'm confident she can still do a pull-up in her 70s, which is pretty damn cool.
Awesome.
So yeah, those two, just being exposed to different leaderships at a young age.
Okay. Name a leader you'd love to have on the podcast.
Ooh. I would love to have... I'd love to have Johnny Wilkinson.
Okay.
He's like probably one of the best fly halves ever to play rugby. He's got a podcast now, which I love listening to. He's a super deep thinker. I would love to have him on the podcast. Johnny Wilkinson.
All right, welcome to the podcast.
I don't think Johnny's that prevalent on social media, so let's tag him anyway.
I thought you were going to say Stephen Bartlett because you keep...
Oh yeah, you know what? I would love to have. But the thing is the thing about Stephen Bartlett, I love Stephen Bartlett. Read all his books, listen to his podcast all the time.
I'm aware of this.
Yes. But the only thing is, because he shares so much, I'm not sure what additional wisdom I would take from having him on the podcast.
Got it. That's interesting.
But yeah, I do really like him.
Awesome. Finish the sentence. If you want to lead, never, ever.
I'm so shit. Quick run. So that's good. If you want to lead, never, ever.
What's one thing you should never do?
Not deliver on your promises.
Ooh, so always under promise, over deliver is what you should be doing.
Make few promises and keep them all.
Got it. Okay, you are my leader. You're my boss now. Give me a performance review of my first episode as an interviewer.
Chris, I think you did a fantastic job. Genuinely, I felt that you were very present the entire time. I felt that you were very engaged. You didn't drift off and look through me, which ants sometimes do. He kind of like stares through my head like there's something happening behind me when I feel he's switching off. I love that you come prepared with questions. I love that you sent me the questions before, although I don't really like reading questions before an interview.
Okay.
But I do appreciate the thought that goes into it. I thought you were great.
Sweet. Can I get a raise then?
Next question.
Okay. Oh, here's the number one. So you always ask our guests, describe your perfect day. So tell us, Ed, describe your perfect team meeting.
Perfect team meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. So no one's eating food, by the way, in a team meeting. I know we do that a lot, but it's really distracting when people are eating.
It's only because it's 1:30.
I know, 100%. And sometimes I'm the one finishing off a meal, so I get it. But in the perfect meeting, no one's eating.
All right.
This team meeting would actually probably take place just before we train. So it's earlier in the morning, people are a little bit more switched on, a little bit more engaged.
Mm.
The meeting's outdoors. It's a sunny day. We are sat in Dog Piss Park or by the water, sun shining down, sat around a table.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would say that the meeting more or less runs in the way that it does, which is basically we move through the agenda of just like the most important things that people need to know. And then we always go around the room. Going around the room basically gives everyone a chance to share something. And then it would finish with our book club or podcast club where we listen or watch something and then we have a group discussion about it. And it's a great opportunity to share a bit of vulnerability, thoughts, things you're thinking. And then we would then from there go straight into our workout and have a bloody good time on the training floor.
Sweet. What's the length of that meeting?
Listen, I would probably say, because we have a big team, we've got a lot of things to go through. I would say our team meetings are generally around like an hour to hour 15, maybe an hour and a half sometimes. But I really think the sweet spot is that, I don't want meetings to last longer than they should do. So if we can cap this at an hour max, that would be great.
All right. And then back to the question about a quote. Got one?
Oh, yeah. Best quote. What was the question again? Best quote for leaders.
No, you just just drop recite a quote about leadership.
Drawing blanks.
Yeah. Be prepared to quote a leadership quote when you're being asked.
Yeah. Thing is, I've got 2 blackboards at home which have about 200 quotes and probably 100 of them about leadership, and I can't think of what one of them is.
Okay, when we promote this on the Instagram, then you're going to need to drop it in there.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to say what you always say to a guest. Edward Haynes, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Hey, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining me all the way from China for your 3rd time.
That's
this
right.
week.
That's
Appreciate
right.
you.